So, good evening, everyone. Thanks all for being here. Always good to have these conversations with you. Let's see, we have Only Love. Good to see you. Conatindo El Islam, welcome. Michael Lola, hello. OR8X, Lolo Main, great to see you. I just sent you a message on Skype. Horse, of course, great to have you. And Dr. Jonathan Gemmell, great. 7 a.m. in the morning for you in New Zealand. So great to have you all here. So, guys, I have a cold, or at least I have a very bad one. My throat's not great, so let's go as long as my throat will hold out. Villainous, hey, nice to see you. Great. How are things down under? Okay, so today we're talking about the rise of the Poopacy. 1:16 p.m. Okay, great. That's welcome, Century Sense. So yeah, so of course I was thinking of entitling this Martin Luther, the Poopacy versus the Papacy. Yeah, it's a ridiculous title for a ridiculous subject. And I've been doing a great deal of reading of historians and theologians who write about Martin Luther, and the breadth of the opinions is really interesting. And although modern research is changing the picture, people are starting to become, I think, a bit more honest, but there's still a fair amount of bias, but also a fair amount of denial, and I think a fair amount of deliberate obfuscation, a fair amount of deliberate attempt to cover up very unpleasant facts. So we'll continue with the document. I want to introduce some new things, and this Luther series is probably going to take a couple of months. I mean, there's going to be a number of episodes. I have a lot of information to get through. I'm still doing research. I'm uncovering more things all the time. So things that which is crazy that I can find these things, but supposedly great theologians, great scholars, PhDs, 50 years at university, Harvard, Yale, Oxford, Cambridge, somehow dropped the ball. I find it questionable. So, given the last episode I did, where I discussed Martin Luther's incredibly foul, vulgar, and abusive language, where you were reading with me on the screen Martin Luther's own statements, Martin Luther's willingness to debase and degrade himself, to disgustingly debase his opponents in the most vile manner. Is that a picture of Martin Luther from his own words, from his own mouth? Is that a picture that you've been presented with by your Sunday school teacher, by your priest, by your historian, by your favorite YouTuber? I would say the answer is probably no. And for very good reason. Lina says, is it covering up or cherry picking? But then is cherry picking just covering up? Yes, I'd say. Mind Queen, hey, thank you very much for becoming a sponsor. Much appreciated. Thank you, Dr. Gemmell. Havenbang, wow, thank you very much. So I really appreciate it. And yes, Lilamain, thank you for posting that. German Hercules, the impact of scatology. I've listed that in the description box. I've also added another document by Mark U. Edwards. You'll find 3 documents by Mark U. Edwards in my Google archive. I've linked one of them below, which is relevant to this discussion. Century Sin says it's Lloyd versus Luther, and Luther is a bloody pulp against the ropes. Thank you, man. Look, I am going up against the mainstream in large part. I'm going up against decades and literally centuries of apologetics that defends Luther. I'm going against a narrative that is literally 500 years old to defend Luther. I'm going up against people who've got these PhDs, which apparently mean a great deal. But I don't think we've been given the truth about Luther. I think we've been presented with an image that given proper research and analysis is false. Now, someone wrote to me recently, the same idiot that told me to go and something myself, which I showed in the previous episode, wrote back and says, "Oh, you're such a hypocrite, Lloyd. Look how often you are associating Martin Luther with feces. You're such a hypocrite. You're doing what you claim Martin Luther did." I was reading Martin Luther's own words. I wasn't inventing stories and narratives to associate Martin Luther. I was reading, those are Martin Luther's own words. I'm not inventing anything. So I don't say how I'm a hypocrite for reading the words that Martin Luther said, but that's exactly what Muslims will do when you read Muhammad to them. And they'll say, "Oh, you're just making up hatred." So anyway, I've banned that account now. This is not in good faith. So I don't see myself wasting my time on this. When people are not willing to yeah, I don't see that this is of any value. Okay, so let's dive into this. This is Luther by Hartman Grissar. Now, I have, for the most part, restricted myself to, oh, those PhDs advised us to get jabbed. I do not trust them. Yes, Rizan, I think that's a fair point. So I've, for the most part, restricted myself to Protestant theologians, Protestant historians, when discussing Martin Luther, so that I would not be accused of, oh, you've just got a Catholic bias. Now, I'm not a Catholic, right? Because, you know, when you become Catholic, you go on an FBI watch list. I don't really want to go on an FBI watch list today, so I'm going to have to wait until the FBI relaxes those rules. So, on that point, I am using Hartman Grissar because one of the greatest defenders of Martin Luther is a guy called James Swan. He's got a blog called Beggars All Reformation. So he recently did a podcast with some guy with a Latin American name, and they were discussing Luther, and I watched the whole 2 hours of it, 1 hour and 56 minutes of it, and they were presenting information about Luther, trying to sort of sanitize the whole, you know, cleanse the whole idea of Luther. Really interesting. I would say they might have left out a few details, critical details that might change the picture a little bit. I will get to that as we go forward. Goedenavond, Harry. Goed om je te zien. So yeah, amazing how Luther followers and Mohammedans all crawfish from the statements of each. Yes, they do, and that disturbs me, horse. Congratulations, Lord, in banning that person. You're no hypocrite. No, thank you. Look, you all have access to my notes. I've given you the notes, so you can all do the research that I'm doing. You all have the same notes I have. So PH does. I like that. Shadow 611 says PH does. Conithienda says, is there any new book in your books? I mean, I have those books. I made a copy of some. Yes, I need to make a new update of my Google archive. I have a private archive that is slightly more up to date, but not hugely so. So you've got 99% of what I have. Okay. So Hartman Grissar is a Catholic. Now, James Swan, as I mentioned earlier, he is very, very complimentary of Hartman, saying that this man's references are spot on. This man's references are to a T correct. He does not make up anything. If he cites anything, this is for sure in Martin Luther's works. Okay, so let me step forward here. I'm going to bring this up because this question did arise multiple times in the last discussion. People asked me about Martin Luther and possession. Right, so I'm going to read to you from this. And thank you, Dr. Jonathan Gemmell, much appreciated. So now, yeah, I get the feeling, because of the responses that I'm starting to get in various places, that this is being noticed. People are starting to notice the research. I don't have a great big channel, but I get the feeling that it's starting to percolate slowly out there, and I'm starting to see in the responses a certain change in the response I'm getting. But on this, on one day, Martin Luther was present at high mass in the monks' choir. He had a fit during the gospel, which, as it happened, told the story of the man possessed. He fell to the ground, and in his paroxysms or spasms, he behaved like one mad. At the same time, he cried out, as his brother monks affirmed, "It is not I, it is not I," meaning that he, Martin Luther, was not the man possessed. So it might seem to have been an epileptic fit, but there is no other instance of Luther having such attacks, although he did suffer from fits of fainting. Some of his companions in the monastery had an idea that he had dealings with the devil. So now, Johann Cochleus, Martin Luther wrote some vicious, nasty, utterly disgusting things about Martin Cochleus. We'll get to that. Who was on good terms with Luther's former associates, asserts positively that a certain singularity of manner had been remarked upon by his fellows in the monastery. Later on, his brother monk, Johann Nathan, went so far as to assert an apostate spirit had mastered Luther, i.e., that Martin Luther stood under the influence of the devil. Melanchthon was afterwards to hear from Luther's own lips of something of the dark states of terror from which Martin Luther had suffered since his youth. Melanchthon says, "When considering attentively examples of God's anger, or any notable accounts of God's punishments, such terror possessed Martin Luther, almost to cause him to give up the ghost. He describes how, as a full-grown man, when such fears overcame him, he would actually writhe on his bed. So, make of this what you will. Right? Make of this what you will. Now, obviously it's not my intention to read the entire 351-page book to you, but I do want to bring attention to issues that have been raised in the past, things that were known about Martin Luther, and where there's smoke, there may well be a fire. Where we have one reference, we may have two, we may have three, we may have a dozen, we may have 100. I just want to show you that, yes, there is evidence to the contrary, to the image and the narrative that is being pushed typically about Luther even today. All right, so I will leave this one. Now we'll go to Luther's Last Battles. Right, this one is here, Luther's Last. So this is a short review. This is the book. Let me just go down there. And Lilo Main just linked this for your reference. Luther's Last Battles, Politics and Polemics, 1531 to 46 by Mark U. Edwards. Excellent historian, does some really great work here. So let me read this to you. The present volume is the continuation and completion of Mark U. Edwards Jr.'s first book, Luther and the False Brethren. Both works concentrate on Luther's often violent and scatological polemics, a subject customarily avoided by scholars sympathetic to the reformer. Edwards' intent here is not to discredit Luther, but to understand the entire man. So Villainous asks, epilepsy? Maybe Miss Squeezy visited him like Muhammad. Look, man, as I said, make of that what you will. Once you guys have seen me, the same evidence I was reading from, you have access to the same sources, and you're going to be seeing exactly the same sources I provide. And from me reading this for years now, I mean, I've known that the particular document we read last time, which we'll finish today, I've known this for years, and it's disturbed me. And the more I read of Martin Luther, the less I think he was even a Christian. So this reminds me of Muhammad, because all through the Quran saying Muhammad is not demon-possessed, he's not crazy. Yeah, we all know Muhammad was. Yeah, and Muhammad used to also writhe from supposed episodes of You Tell Me What It Was. FM Knight of the Immaculate Heart says, I can't thank you enough for your hard and meticulous work, Lloyd. God bless you and protect you. Thank you. I'm a Catholic and proud of it, regardless of the times and criticism. Keep up the great work. Yeah, well, thank you. Someone showed our paper titled Muhammad, Luther, and Poop Theory. Yeah, man. That's probably coming. Okay, let's continue. As Luther grew older, he became harsher, more ready to vilify his adversaries. Luther viewed the Jews, like the Sacramentarians, as subverters of the gospel from within Germany, and thus as servants of the devil. All right, so that's Luther speaking nicely. Now, this is relevant because I'm going to be talking in the future about my suspicions as to how Luther was misinterpreting within his translation of the German Bible, how he was misinterpreting the Bible and creating an interpretation that was not in step with the Masoretic, not in step with the other translations. And of course, everyone's going to say, and I've heard this many times, I've seen the comments too often directed at me, oh Lloyd, you know, Martin Luther created the German language. Without Martin Luther, Germans would not know how to speak German. Martin Luther gave them all those fine words like poop and shit apparently. And also, without Martin Luther, there would not have been a Bible in German. Do you know that? In fact, the Catholic Church was murdering anyone who translated the Bible. And without Martin Luther, you would not have a Bible, Lloyd. Yeah, well, so according to some resources, and I'm going to get the number wrong here, but I have the references and I'll be going through them in the near future. By the time Martin Luther published his first Bible, there were at least 14, if not 150 translations of the Bible in German already. Okay, a minimum of 14. Oddly enough, not one of those 14 translations, or 19, or maybe 150 translations of the Bible in German, at the time that Martin Luther released his very first translation of the nonsense, not one of those German translations had, for some reason, added the word alone into Romans, right? Romans 3:26, Romans 3:29, whatever it was, where Luther felt, you know, it was very necessary for me to add the word alone into the Bible. Not a single one of the translations outside of his had to do that. But of course, Martin Luther had to because reasons. So we will discuss, I'll get to all of this in the future. Edwards gives convincing evidence of Luther's susceptibility to politics and politicians. In other words, he was bought and sold by the politicians. He had sold his soul to the state. Luther was increasingly required by Elector Johann Friedrich not to advise conscience, but to relieve consciences. In other words, not to advise people what is morally right, but to make them accept things that the state wanted them to accept. Make it palatable. Make them swallow the bitter pill. Right. Requesting him to employ his talent for picturesque defamation against the Duke and the enemies of the state. Martin Luther had a talent for picturesque defamation. So Martin Luther's, one of his talents was apparently great theology, fantastic Christian, and how to defame people using utterly scandalous language. So when Johann Friedrich needed to justify his political aim to take over the Diocese of Naumburg, he approached Luther, and of course Luther provided the necessary defamation. This study and propaganda. This study focuses on the neglected older man. Melita Manin says, sounds a lot like modern day wokeism. Well, yeah, Luther... Look, the reason that Luther came up with the idea of sola scriptura, or scripture alone, is because of, specifically and explicitly, because of nominalism. I've already discussed nominalism in multiple episodes. Luther was a woke nominalist, and that's why we'll get to that in the future. Edwards has celebrated Luther's quincentennial by illuminating the reformer's thought and personality in a way that could never be achieved by studying the man's words alone. Future historians will identify Edwards' book as one of the several that marked a turning point in Luther research. No one interested in the Reformation can afford to ignore it. So, what we get out of this is that Luther was a tool for politicians. He sold his soul to the politicians. So let's go to, there's a couple of small sections I want to bring to your attention here. Luther outdid even the violence and vulgarity of Against Hanswurst in his 1545 Against the Papacy at Rome, founded by the devil. On the heels of these treatises, he published a series of scatological, in other words, containing words like poop, to make it polite, and violent woodcuts that in the most graphic terms suggested how good Christians should treat the papacy. In these and other treatises, Luther bestialized his opponents, most frequently likening them to pigs or asses, donkeys, or called them liars, murderers, and hypocrites. They were all minions of the devil, and he directed the devil to his ass. Right. He renamed the papal decretals, or the papal encyclicals, Decraptals, Drecketalen, and Farnese Pope Fartass, Fartsesel, and her sodomitical hellishness, Paula III. That's Pope Paul III. Not all of his later polemics were vulgar, but many had strong political overtones, and so raised the question whether religious principle was being subordinated to politics. Now look, this is an academic who's writing very politely. The answer is yes, of course. He was subordinating the religious in the service of the political. I've said this already, I've brought evidence of that, and you see, no one wants to come out and say it. He was given the task of discrediting the council called by the Pope and justifying the Protestant refusal to participate in it. He was also given the task of justifying in print the seizure of the bishopric of Naumburg by Elector Johann Friedrich, and he defended and applauded the two offensives of the League of Schmalkalden against Braunschweig-Wolfenbüttel. Okay, and then of course with Landgrave Philipp von Hesse, he advised the Landgrave to commit bigamy. So Martin Luther signed off on the polygamous marriage of the Landgrave Philip of Hesse. And when rumors of the second marriage began circulating, Luther urged the Landgrave to reply to inquiries with a big fat lie. Okay, now let's continue here. Last piece. And then I'll jump back into the original document. He did not always initiate his own polemics. The stance he took, the issues he discussed, indeed the very tenor of his disputes, were frequently set by others before he ever picked up the pen. In other words, he was a tool of the politicians. Martin Luther sold his soul. He was manipulating and he was altering theology in the service of politics. He had placed the church in the service of a corrupt state. Adonis Alex says, you're correct. No one wants to say this truth. Thank you for the time to educate us. We're welcome. I'm giving you my opinion. My opinion is based on this particular evidence, on the things I'm reading. Now, of course, you might find one or two small errors here. However, given the overwhelming detail found in other sources, the corroborating evidence, given that I'm going to be going through dozens, I'm going to be cherry-picking hundreds of different quotations. Many of these from Luther himself, from dozens and dozens of historians and many, many, many sources, which you all have access to. You're going to see that I'll be cherry-picking and telling lies by saying exactly what Martin Luther said himself. So yeah, that's at least how I'm told. I'm cherry-picking and lying when I'm actually literally reading what Martin Luther said. So, second, the conventional approach tends to highlight the theological component of the polemics and underestimate Martin Luther's secular aspects, as well as the rhetorical effect on readers of Luther's forceful language and arguments. What he's referring to here is the law of unintended consequences. Maybe you thought you said A. However, you don't know who's listening and how they're going to receive those words. So, yeah. Finally, traditional analyses fail to consider the varying meanings a polemic may have had for different readers, such as Protestant rulers, Protestant laity, and opponents. Instead, it is mistakenly assumed that the meaning of a polemic is determined by Luther's explicit intentions and theological arguments, as if he was writing as a genius for geniuses. So, no, Martin Luther might have said we should have murdered all the Jews. I mean, he might have written those words. He might have said those things. He might have said, we need to kill the Jews, we need to burn their houses, we need to steal their money, we need to put them in forced labor, whatever. Martin Luther might have said that, but it's how you need to understand it different. It's how we interpret it. And the fact that the Nazis did literally word for word what Martin Luther said is a misinterpretation of Martin Luther, because Martin Luther was misunderstood. Yeah. Okay, moving on. So let's go back to this document. Okay, let me just make sure that I didn't miss anything. Some of these things are told in history lessons, but not so much to remember. But his language was harsh as hell. Yeah, in the Netherlands, yeah. So let me see, have I missed any good comments? The church was strict on translation, not prohibiting the use of the conditions, was that the language be mature enough to express the needed concept. Yeah, okay. He deserves severe punishment for misleading millions. I would agree. Luther must be exposed. Thank you, Rick Filmmaker. Right. So Momo also had a voice speak to him when he went to relieve himself. Weird. Yes, Martin Luther. Remember, Martin Luther said that the toilet is the domain of the devil, and Martin Luther got so much theological inspiration while in the domain of the devil because God spoke to him while Martin Luther was in the toilet, which is normal, I guess. I mean, it's probably standard. You go to the toilet and God gives you theological insight to create a new religion. That's probably standard Christian theology, I'm guessing. Okay, so now I'm going to bring up Danielle, right? Luther's undertaking. Now, Danielle, again, when we go back to James Swan, beggars all reformation, this is the go-to guy for the defense of Martin Luther. He'll give his story. Well, these days Catholic theologians don't think very much of Danielle. Danielle was blah, 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 blah. Right, the Catholic Church thinks very highly of Danielle. They praise the guy. And of course, when we go through the Catholic theologians that, for instance, James Swan mentions, we might find a few small, tiny little microscopic little problems with those Catholic theologians. And there might be a reason he's picking those particular theologians, but we'll get to that in the future. So Luther's undertaking was Faustian. The black magic artist, Dr. Faust, is only an idealized Luther. So Dr. Faust, in the book Faustus, right, is a version of Martin Luther. The devil controlled him. The devil who bothers Luther so terribly is Luther's own uneasy conscience, and this devil plagues him more and more. The Reformation was the Cloaca Maxima, the large drainage canal through which the debris which had long been piling up was conducted away, which would otherwise have ruined and poisoned everything if it had remained in the Catholic Church. Now, this is Beggars All Reformation from James Swan, okay? And he speaks of Danielle, and I want to mention this. I will cover this again in the future, I'll repeat this, but James quotes ecumenical sympathizers like a man called Lortz, okay? This is Joseph Lortz, a Catholic theologian, to undermine Danielle, right? So Heinrich Danielle's work on Luther is highly regarded by the Catholic Church. Now, this is the Catholic Church's magisterium point of view. De Niffler's extensive research and erudition shed light on Luther's career and character, aiming to present the reformer truthfully. De Niffler's critique of Luther's treatise on monastic vows and his analysis of Luther's theology and exegesis are considered significant contributions to the Reformation and understanding Luther. His work is praised for thoroughness and mastery. Right, regarding Luther's early life, the Catholic Church values De Niffler's work, and so blah, blah. Okay, I'll leave that for now. So I want you to get that point. Okay, that whatever may be said of De Niffler, the Catholic Church holds him in high esteem. Catholic theologians may not, but then we might want to go and have a look at the bona fides of those particular Catholic theologians. You might find that, oh, maybe they joined the Nazi party. You never know. They might have volunteered to become Nazis during, the Nazi era. But I guess that, it's just normal to sign up and become a Nazi, and then the Nazis loved Martin Luther, and of course they knew write negative things about Martin Luther, but that's probably just a coincidence. Okay, on to the topic. Now again, of course, James Swan does mention that, Lortz did become a Nazi, but you've got to look at it in this light, and presents a few facts, and of course maybe there's a few additional facts that we can offer that might change that picture a little bit, and just, we might want to add a few more details because maybe he left a couple of details out. You never know. Okay, so now this is the birth and origin of the Pope. The Pope is being pooped out quite literally out of a demon. The Pope is being breastfed by a demon. The Pope is being looked after by a demon. The Pope, and so on. Okay, and this is the Pope and all his friends are being, the bishops are being shat out quite bluntly. So let's just pick up, we did a couple of these slides, but I'll just repeat these for reference. So, right, let me see if I missed anything. You're not understanding what he meant with these words. You're changing the meaning of the words according to some modern Protestant believers. Yes, unfortunately. Right, so Luther did leave his skid mark on religion. That is very, very true. So let me see. Okay, so his fecal association of the Pope with the devil was taken to extreme. His arguments, nothing more than flatulence and feces, but he himself was fecal matter. This is referring to the Pope. The Pope in this image was born of a she-devil's rectum and received his nourishment and care from another she-devil. That what the Pope consumed came from the body of a she-devil implied what was inside him was devilish, and that he was born rectally rendered him living excrement. There was no possible answer to this. How could one respond? But the Catholic side either did not understand the power of such imagery to shape the opinions of people in many strata of German society, or they refused to pander at this level. In the words of Thomas More, no buffoon was ever found who exceeded him, so stolid a bearer of blows that he will thrust filth into his own mouth, which he spits out into another's bosom. When Catholics depicted Luther as the enemy, they portrayed him as a lascivious sot, a glutton, and a fool. Thomas Murner, an illustration from the great Lutheran fool. Now, Thomas Murner allowed Luther more dignity than the Lutherans offered their enemies. Below, the buttocks of Luther's enemy, Coarse, were displayed for the world to see, and that was a mere fraction of the humiliations the Lutherans offered him in the following woodcut. Okay, so let's have a look at this. These are demons, and I want you to look here. This is Coarse, that's the demon standing on Coarse's shoulder, and you tell me what's happening here. So the demon is pulling his ass cheeks apart, and Coarse is greedily eating. So, and I'm told this is what Christians do. This is what the founder of the Protestant religion would do, because this is the Christian thing to do, because Christ was guiding him to discover the original Christian faith that was unblemished. So, where's truth? How are we supposed to serve God if our traditions are rotten from the root? Well, Martin Luther was rotten from the root, but Luther was very, very savage. Alplexus, I'm born from a long French Protestant lineage. It's really great to learn all those things and to stand with truth and follow Jesus and no Protestant. It makes me really sad. Well, that could be a Gnostic statement. So, okay, so let's continue. You can see here demons and okay, so that goes on. Coarse here was portrayed as consuming the feces of the devil. In fact, he appeared unable to get enough. Simultaneously, he relieved himself of a free flow of books of excrement. So simultaneously, Coarse was pulling open his own ass cheeks, and he was pooping out books. So Coarse's stuff was all just feces. So this is the. So remember, the Catholic Church was corrupt. Martin Luther came to fix things, to really put the Christ back into Christianity that the Catholic Church had corrupted, and this was the best that he could do. So this was really fixing Christianity, definitely. There was no answerable theological argument here. Any response Coarse might have offered would have been laughed at by Luther's allies. Coarse had already been rendered impotent with the etching of this image in the minds of Luther's supporters. Around 1525, Polish Catholics came up with a song about Luther. Since Luther considers everyone shit compared with him, and in his filthy mouth has nothing but shit, I ask you, wouldn't you say that he's a shitty prophet? Such as a man's words are, so is the man himself. So yeah, I happen to agree with the Polish here. Considering that I live in Poland, I'm sitting in Poland right now, and Just Janice says, no wonder there's a division. So yes, Just Janice, when you listen to or read or whatever some of the Protestant apologetics, now I'm sure in many cases they are deliberately, they are genuinely ignorant of the utter depravity of the absolutely disgusting, depraved nature of Martin Luther's writings and thought. So in many cases, obviously they were told some lie and they repeat that lie. So they're acting out of ignorance. It's the lie they're repeating. So they don't realize, and of course they've been taught by Martin Luther to hate the Catholic Church. They've been taught the most vile, disgusting imagery and lies about the Catholic Church. That is not true, because Martin Luther spread these lies willfully, willingly, gleefully. Martin Luther encouraged others to spread these lies. But yes, and they blame the Catholic Church, where of course it's blindness as to the actual source of a great number of these ideas. Martin Luther was causing massive division. Toxic division. Yeah. So let me see if I missed anything. Yeah, if you guys would like to offer any super chats, you're welcome. I'll be paying attention to the chat. And yeah, of course, if you do like the content, if you appreciate what I do despite its uncomfortable nature, then yeah, please do like it, do share it, do subscribe, and thank you again for supporting the channel. I really do appreciate that. Evil for Adam says Luther was also saying prefer the Turks, Islam above the Papish. Now, of course, you can show that Martin Luther did say nice things about the Muslims, and then of course someone's going to say, hold on, wait, here's Martin Luther saying something bad about the Muslims. Now, of course, just like when you talk about Muhammad, you can say, here's Muhammad saying to rape the women. Muslim's going to say, well, hold on, here's Muhammad saying something nice about women, saying the opposite. Now, unfortunately, just like with Muhammad, no different. You'll find exactly the same situation with Martin Luther. Martin Luther on Monday will say, those Jews are so nice, we really should invite them over for a beer. And then on Wednesday saying, we really need to kill all those people. They're bloody liars. Look how they've corrupted the Bible. They wrote all of these lies. Look how they changed the Bible. They changed this verse. They changed these words. Oh my God, these Jews should be killed. So yeah, you can find both, right? Which one is true? Well, do you believe Luther when he was 12? Or do you believe Luther when he was 60? Which one is right? So there's this abrogation issue going on with Martin Luther and the Protestants. Excellent, Silvana Leveria. I'm listening from the start, so I'm catching up. So yeah, great to have you there. So yes, that's true. I grew up a Baptist. They taught us to be anti-Catholic, 100%. Yeah, they got it from Luther. Luther taught hatred. Luther bluntly taught hatred. Now, of course, someone's going to show me a quote where, well, when Luther was 19, Luther actually said something really nice. And when Luther was 42, Luther was talking a lot of nasty things. So yeah, I don't know which am I to believe. Okay. Honest question, did Luther inspire the Marquis de Sade? I don't know, but you never know. Make Christianity Christian again, Martin Ackerman. Yes, that's a really good idea. Silvana says, hello, I'm so pleased you're back with part 2 of the most horrid poop man in the whole of history. Yes. Sorry. So don't make me laugh, I'm going to cough. So, I did not know Luther praised the Ottomans before I heard it from you. Good to know. Yeah, no, there's this definitely, look, what I'm thinking is, though, if I can find certain references, okay, if Martin Luther said these things, of course, assuming we're not incorrectly interpreting them, because I've got to interpret them in a nice way, of course. If we're not incorrectly interpreting them, then if I can find it, then I'm assuming there is more. I'm assuming behind some academic paywall or behind some academic, some academic cellars somewhere, there is more information that historians and academics have access to that I don't. But I'm assuming it exists. Okay, let's continue. So, he also continued to win many verbal and visual battles by means of foul language, and thereby increase his stature as victor in his field. Now, I think we know Muhammad did the very same. So why are we trying to outdo Muhammad here for foul language? Martin Pooper, yeah. As victor, he was virile. That Luther succeeded in achieving an image of virility, whether consciously or not, is evinced by the portrayals of the two misfits. Okay, let's continue here. That's Martin Luther as a donkey, I think, was a cow, was a bull. Martin Luther as a bull. The monk cough before Pope Adrian. Misbirths were seen as, okay, maybe I'll just skip all that. That's a bit of, I'll skip that. Look, I'll leave it up on the screen. You guys can read this on your own time. Okay, but Martin Luther was really strong and muscular and, you know, and so on. You can read this in your own time. I must have skipped over that for a reason. Okay, this is Martin Luther depicting, or at least his followers at his bidding. Notice he's depicting the papal ass with, you can see the cloven hoof and the dragon's claw. Right, so this is the Pope, the papal ass, the Pope as a female dragon demon she-donkey. Okay, Roseanne says, don't make Lloyd cough. I'm still recovering from abdominal surgery. Wow, sorry about that. I hope you're okay. In Holland, divided by Protestants, many cities had to pay jizya to the Protestants. That's why my great aunts are not married. Yeah, look, there's a story to be told about Holland. When I get to the Spanish Inquisition, we'll probably have to talk about Holland. Thank you, DC. Very much appreciated. Thank you for that support. You gave a comment earlier. Luther and Calvin have spread fear and confusion. The very things. Okay, let me just put this up for you. DC says, Luther and Calvin have spread fear and confusion, the very things that government and organizations use to control people. Yes, they both had political agendas. They both had secular agendas. As I've mentioned before with Calvin, and I've been showing with various pieces of information with regards to Luther. Martin Puther and the Faeces thesis. Jeez, Roxy, sorry. I don't want to laugh, my throat hurts too much. Yes, just Janice, he was talking out of his, yeah. So let me continue. That's your third soup on a live stream. Thank you, DC. Thank you. It just says there, that's your third soup on a live stream. Thank you. So Martin Luther, the original Scatman carouser, yeah. Okay, let's continue. So we'll finish this. The papal ass. Now, this depiction of the papal ass portrayed the Pope as unquestionably female, right? But he was also portrayed as a female on more than one occasion, and Luther portrayed the whore of Babylon in the papal tiara in chapter 17 of Revelation in his New Testament. Would German princes, German warriors, have risked their lives and their fortunes to throw their political support behind Luther if Luther was so easily portrayed as a female? So in other words, he made the Pope look weak by portraying the Pope as a female. But Martin Luther, of course, he wouldn't attract the support of the state and an army if he was a weak man, because why would Martin Luther, this great theologian, need to attract the support of the state and the force of the state? Because he's the good guy, right? But a monk, Luther needed to be viewed as male, as virile and German, in order to achieve a following amongst powerful laymen. Yeah, Martin Luther needed to lead the state, the war machine of the state, the political machine of the state. I guess that's all religious. That's got something to do with Christianity that I just don't understand. So let's continue. Dr. Jonathan Gemmell says, Protestant poop art is as bad as the bogus theology. Now, let me just grab the last few comments. Even scholars say that Luther and his followers were just spreading lies about Catholicism because they knew the world saw them as the true church, so made lies, and they're the whore of Babylon. So Martin Luther wrote extensively about the Pope as the whore of Babylon, as the Pope as demonic, as the Pope eating feces from the demons. I mean, you'll see his sort of art in that line. So Martin Luther it was crazy how far he was willing to go. So yeah, we'll get into Bohemia and all of that later, but for that you're gonna have to go talk about Jan Hus. Now, of course, people have been writing to me like, you're wrong about Jan Hus. You're wrong about Jan Hus. And yeah, you're wrong if you don't know all the facts for certain. But yeah, sure. Sure, whatever. I just made up everything that I read written by historians all by myself. In the papal bull Ex Surge Domine, the Pope called Luther a wild boar. The wild boar from the forest seeks to destroy it, and every wild beast feeds upon it. Of all the images in Scripture, why was the boar chosen? In Luther's world, what did it mean to be a wild boar? We have Luther's own words describing the dreaded Turk as a wild boar. Luther's description of the Turk illustrates for us what the Pope added to Luther's image when he used this term, the wild boar and unique one. Namely, the Turk came and laid it waste again. And I believe the prophet is speaking in this sense, for the Turk is rightly the wild boar, because he's wanton and fierce at the same time. He teaches and permits wantonness, and he compels, which is willfulness, the will. And now, I've been reading much about scholars defending Luther and various well-known YouTube figures or online figures defending Luther, saying that Luther never intended to cause a split. Luther actually blah, blah, whatever. You just read what Martin Luther had to say. This is not the sum total of what Martin Luther had to say. This is a sample of what Martin Luther had to say. I'm not going to read every single content of every single book to you, but this is just to tell you that this is just a sample of what exists, of what Martin Luther was saying. And if we judge him by what he said, then clearly he was looking for a fight. He was looking for trouble. Clearly he was not acting in good faith. And there's lots of discussion about Martin Luther based on, but Martin Luther this, Martin Luther that. For instance, Martin Luther, wanted to do strict exegesis, and Martin Luther, there are things I would show you about Martin Luther's own statements from his own words, saying, no one can tell me how to interpret the Bible. Basically, to paraphrase, to not explicitly quote him right now, Martin Luther saying, I will interpret the Bible the way that I want. So I'm not bound by any rules of how the Bible is interpreted. I can interpret the Bible any way I want. So Martin Luther was making up his own rules on that, but we'll get to that again in the future. A wild boar was a thing to be feared. Wild, brutal, wanton, and savage was the boar. The Pope, in using the boar while intending to convey the threat of Luther's heresy and wantonness, achieved this amongst papal followers, but he lent something useful to Luther. For as fierce and brutal, he was a masculine creature not to be taken lightly. So in other words, Martin Luther's followers liked the image of a brutal, nasty, disgusting Luther, because that's strong, because Christ was nasty, brutal, and spoke about people in the most disgusting fecal language, and St. Paul did the same, and therefore Martin Luther was merely following in the footsteps of the apostles, following in the footsteps of Jesus by drawing pictures of people eating feces, because that's what Jesus would have done. Martin Luther clearly asked, what would Jesus do? And then he proceeded to draw pictures of people eating feces in imitation of Jesus, no doubt. And if that sounds like a ridiculous statement, it's because it is. Because what this man, of course, I've seen many comments saying, well, Martin Luther might have made a few mistakes here and there, might have made a few slips, might have said Tuesday when he meant Wednesday, could have made the odd mistake like that, but that doesn't make Martin Luther's theology untrue. So I've noticed people will excuse anything. Just like Mohammedans will defend Muhammad, these are Lutherans defending Luther, because once you undermine Luther on a moral perspective, and even questioning, this interview with James Swan and Javier Perdomo, even while they were discussing this, it's like they were saying, why would people want to attack Luther on a moral basis? The man was such a fine, upstanding man. I can't understand it. He was a fine example of Christianity. It's like, okay, yeah, it beats me. So the Pope lent gravity to Luther and in turn to the German people. See, the Pope feared Luther, and as Luther through scatology had identified himself as a robust, earthy German, this must have transferred pride to Luther's followers. That says a lot about Luther's followers. So, in a perverse way, this imagery of the boar must have reinforced a sense of nationalism and pride. Look, we're disgusting, gluttonous, vile, nasty, fecal-languaged people. We're so proud of ourselves because we've just told those evil Catholics to eat poop, quite literally, and we're following the real religion, brought the real, genuine Christian religion, brought to us by Martin Luther, who is walking in the footsteps of Christ. That's good stuff. Luther for the win. Conclusion. You just check the comments here. The Lutherans and Calvinists destroyed so much art in Holland, even music. Yes, there was a lot of destruction, a lot of theft. Luther had erectile dysfunction, was supposed to look virile. Well, he was a very sickly man. The man was a very sickly man. It was propaganda. So the same as Muslims take churches, Luther took so many churches in Holland and destroyed all inside, even the great organs. Yeah. Many Protestants, because of course the organ was taking up the place that you need to put the drum set. Like, hello, where are you going to put the drum set with that big organ in the way? So many Protestants at the time were fine with profane art, but were livid over sacred art in the churches. Makes you think, yeah. That was from Oratex. Yes, Just Genesis. Yes, I've been watching other YouTube channels on Luther. Lots of excuses. Yep. Let me just grab a screen cap, and I can just makes it a bit easier for me to just read the lot. And then I heard Luther quote a verse. I heard a Luther quote that was something like, "If you don't follow Luther's interpretation, you can all go to hell." Probably me, because I quoted that before. I've discussed that in the past, where Luther said you have to follow his interpretation. And if you don't follow his interpretation, you are going to hell, because only he, Martin Luther, is correct. And then he complains about the Schwärmerei, and he complains about people who've taken his words that everyone is free to be their own church, everyone is free to be their own pope. He literally wrote that. And also, there's a great deal of Martin Luther's material still in Gothic German, untranslated, and also still in Latin, untranslated, that one has to wonder what's in there. So yeah, Martin Luther was like, I am right, my name is Martin, I am perfectly correct, I am speaking for Christ, I'm a prophet, God speaks through my mouth, and everyone else is wrong, and you have to follow me. And then of course he basically privatized religion. He made private interpretation, private religion, private theology the order of the day. So that's exactly what Martin Luther did. And that's because he was a nominalist, and we'll talk about that again in the future. So yeah, that's Martin Luther right there. So yeah, okay, let me see. Have I missed anything? That sounds like something he'd say. Yes, no, he said it. Martin Luther was a Gnostic. Yes, Martin Luther was a Gnostic. I will talk about Martin Luther's Gnosticism. It's just I have so much material I need to get through, so I need to do more of these live streams. But Martin Luther was most certainly a Gnostic. He was very heavily influenced by Gnosticism. So his Gnosticism had a Christian characteristic, but his Christianity had a strong Gnostic flavor, most certainly. The irony of most of the corruption was not directly from Rome, but from their own lords since the end of investiture. I'll get into the history another time. So what we have here, Luther had mastery of language as a weapon in his field, and very disgusting language. But scatology, the use of feces, set Martin apart from Rome and reinforced his image as distinctly German. So in other words, being able to utilize feces as a weapon of language was distinctly German. What does that say about German culture and Martin Luther's followers, who appreciated this imagery? Coarse language illustrated the gulf between smooth Italian culture and robust, earthy German culture. Yeah, that's really nicely stated. That's really smooth language. It allowed Luther to typify a common German man in a time of rising nationalist pride. It appears that Luther's strength was more important than his fairness. Yes, Luther's strength was more important than his theology. Luther's ability to propagandize for the government was more important than his honesty. Martin Luther's ability to sell a story for the government was more important than his ability to be a good Christian and tell the truth. So yeah, Luther's coarse, insolent bravado lent him the appearance of boldness and courage. Does that sound like Muhammad and his followers to you at all? I mean, are you getting Muhammad vibes here? I am. Towards the end of his life, he crossed every line of decency, and he outstripped even himself in later years. And he crossed every line of decency. Luther's scatology went beyond the rules of decorum even for his own era, and with scatology he gained allies and power. So what kind of people, what kind of minds, what kind of spirits, souls? What kind of people are drawn to foul, disgusting, insulting, scatological language? Ask yourself. What kind of people are drawn to the filthiest of language? Are drawn to someone who specialized in this kind of rhetoric? Ask yourself. Very debased people. Yes, Roxy. So we see this in his fellow monks' adulatory response to what was arguably Luther's coarsest sermon from 1515, 2 years before he nailed the 95 Faeces to the castle door. For Luther to achieve a following of more than a few monks and a handful of pious people, he had to be viewed as powerful. So the way for him to be powerful was not to be a good Christian, humble, pious, but to fart at the devil, to be a completely debased character. I guess that's how Christians should do it. Do you guys do it as well? I mean, let me know. Let me know if you know, if I'm missing something about how Christianity is supposed to be. Now, someone of course could say, but Lloyd, you've said the S word on your channel more than a few times. Yes, guilty. Except I haven't started a religion. I didn't claim to be speaking directly for God as a prophet of God, and to have rediscovered the Bible after the Catholic Church hid it for 1500 years, and also to have rediscovered the exact, accurate, 100% early Christianity that was covered up by the Catholic Church. I don't recall making those claims anytime recently. And they'll go, but the Pope was also bad. Yeah, the Pope is the manager. He didn't found the religion. The Pope didn't create it. He's managing it. Mismanagement of a company doesn't mean the company's products are bad. It just means you've got a crappy manager. But Martin Luther is the creator of the Protestant religion. He is the first Protestant. Now, you can find proto-Protestants prior to him, and these proto-Protestants, well, you can draw a direct line from these proto-Protestants through Luther to Karl Marx. So, yeah, Protestantism to Karl Marx might be... I don't know if that would Protestantism to Karl Marx, would that be a great name for a rock band? Or would that be a good name for a talk? And we could go, Lloyd, you're lying again. You're lying. You liar. I'm like, I don't know, man. All these historians seem to be saying all these things. It's like, I don't know, man. I'm just reading what the historians are saying. You tell me. So, yeah. So, great name for a rock band, or a good name for a presentation that says that Protestantism just led straight to Karl Marx. And we know Karl Marx is a good Christian. So, so Martin Luther had to fit the German definition of masculinity. And yeah, so skills meant mastery of language, mastery of argument. Yeah, and flinging poo, obviously, and demonstrated ability to dominate others with these skills. Well, in this case, the skill would be to fling poo better than anyone else. And to, yeah. So Lloyd isn't infallible like Luther was. Yeah, and everyone's going to say, but Luther was, just human. It's like, no, Luther made lots of fascinating claims, but we'll discuss all of that. Look, guys, I know I make lots of very blunt, very big claims. I know I say the craziest things, but that's because I've read these things. And I'm sitting there gobsmacked as I'm reading this stuff. And I'm like, I just can't stop reading because I'm like, this is insanity. And then I'm going to eventually present it to you in this format, or in some format. But yes, the Protestants that Martin Luther, these proto-Protestants that Martin Luther, the proto-Nazi, took his inspiration from, these guys, these are socialists, okay? These are socialists. These are also Gnostics, and these are complete whack jobs. Okay, so while often able to defeat enemies in his field with lofty words and truly towering intellect, yeah, sure, whatever, only the educated in German society could fully comprehend these battles. When Martin used scatology, however, he set forth in common language unanswerable insolence and dominated his enemies in a way that every German person could understand. So by using unanswerable insolence and dominating his enemies using the most vicious language, Germans could really understand, yeah, that's a tough guy, that's a good Christian. We know what, he needs to start a new national religion. He needs to, yeah, this is the guy to, wow, that is so Christ-like. Look at him fling poo. Good God, Jesus couldn't fling poo that far. Excuse my sarcasm, but this is disgusting. I mean, how am I to interpret this? This is Martin Luther. So, yeah, DC, thank you very, very much. I am so grateful. Thank you very much. He says, let me just grab that. DC says, I found your channel about a week ago. Keep up the great work. My oldest nephew is a pastor in the PCA and believes in Calvinism and has quite a bit of arrogance in him. Have a meal on me. Thank you very much. No, I need to subscribe to a service that's going to make shorts out of my videos. I need to pay that. Sorry. That's good. Yeah, I mean, man, my software bill annually is insane. But thank you very much. I'll put this towards subscribing to this. I need to pay an annual fee to save some money for this service to convert my videos and make shorts out of them. So yeah, I have 4 videos on Calvinism. It's two different presentations, each in 2 parts. Ah, darn it, this thing's doing it again. Let me just switch that off on my camera, because it keeps doing that. Okay, that's done. Okay, so thank you very much. And then, Melita Mintz, when you call out the diabolical surrounding the propaganda against the Catholic Church, these individuals also seem to manifest. Yeah, I've seen a lot of them come at me lately. It's a wonder that Lutherans don't have a poop slinging contest. They've lost the deposit of Lutherfer. Yeah, Luther certainly left a deposit. Not of faith, though. So his holy ideas were used by Nazis. Yes, they were. I mean, no, the Nazis literally, word for word, used Luther's ideas. It wasn't like they misrepresented Martin Luther's writings. They applied it like it was a textbook. It's insane. I mean, look, people are going to tell you, certainly, that no, they misunderstood Martin Luther. What Martin Luther said was, when Martin Luther wrote, oh, this disabled boy, you should murder him. Either take him down to the river and drown him to death because he has no soul, because he's deformed and he's clearly possessed by Satan. You should kill him. Or hold a pillow over his mouth and suffocate him, kill him to death. Kill this disabled boy to death. Protestants will go, what Martin Luther meant was, and the Nazis were just abusing, Martin Luther's kindness. And Martin Luther, here, look, Martin Luther said some other thing about disabled people on a different day. It's like, yeah, Muhammad said something nice about this topic on a different day. Here, Muhammad said, murder them, cut off their hands and feet and chop off their tongues and feed them, donkey parts. And on another day, it's like, no, Muhammad said this. It's like, okay, Muhammad said both of these things. Luther said both of these things, which we have a Muhammad problem. With Martin Luther, we have a Muhammad problem. Byzantine Finest said, Lloyd is bringing the heat. Well, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so now, Luther used the age-old method of demeaning adversaries and mockery, right? It rendered mute any response to the masses. So, right, far more important to Luther's survival than his theological brilliance, I am not so sure about that theological brilliance, was his psychological brilliance. So, to defeat his enemy before the German people, he had to do it in a way that was comprehensible to all, not just to the monk, not just to the educated priest and lawyer, but to the German everyman. And that's why Faeces was the best way to approach the German everyman all the way up to the monks that surrounded Luther, which leads us to ask, how misguided, how depraved, how lost were the monks that Luther was fraternizing with? There was a problem. And yeah, so I will say that the Martin Luther, in one sense, was not the originator. He was the end product. He was the guy who finished the process. Martin Luther finished a given process. He culminated a given process that had been going on for a long time. So this corruption was something that had been present for a while. And we have to go to Italy. We've got to go to various sources in Italy, but ultimately it's also going to come down to the occult and the Muslims. And yeah, it's all connected. So Martin Luther wanted the best source. Trust me, bro. Yeah. Trust me, bro. That was Martin Luther's source. Love me some poop and throw them kids out the window. They aren't working right. Yeah. So Hitler hated Christianity. Yes, I've covered Hitler at length. I think I've got 6 parts on Hitler. And I keep having people telling me, Hitler this. I'm like, I've got 6 extremely detailed shows on Hitler. It's like, good grief. Yeah. So, okay. So guys, that I think wraps up this particular talk. Would you like me to show you some things from my current Martin Luther slides? Because I will be working through the slides. I'm still developing those slides. They're still being built. But that basically wraps up this particular discussion on Martin Luther and Martin Luther's scatology, or at least gives us a solid introduction to it. This is not the only things to be said, but I believe this gives us a very strong representative sample. So have I exaggerated? Have I misrepresented the facts? Have I distorted information? Do you feel that have I given a balanced view? I mean, granted, over time I have come to really think this is an absolutely disgusting, depraved man for the reasons presented. So yeah, Luther did inspire the Nazis. That is 100% true. We'll discuss all of that. I have already discussed that. Let me see here. We've already discussed some of these things. Yeah. Okay. But by the way, I did mention to you guys that Martin Luther's surname, Luder, means to lure people, to deceive people, to bait them, to lure them, right? To deceive. It also means to call, to invite, which is identical to the meaning of the word dawa, right? It's actually technically his name we can literally make his name as Martin Dawa. We would not be wrong if we did this. Martin Dawa, right? With the connotation of deceit, lure, bait, and summon. So, yeah, you tell me. You tell me if there's a message in the message or if I'm just, yeah. So, no, it's just such an oddity. Let's have a look here. My dad's name is Martin. I feel bad. No, your dad's name is Martin. Okay, hold on. But yeah, look, you need to go into Martin Luther's name. It's actually Martinus, right? Technically, it comes from Mars, the god of war. So Martin Luther's first name is really for the god of war. And then his surname is to bait, to deceive, Dawa. So the god of war and Dawa. That's the connotations of his name. Okay, let me see. Sola Fide from the Privy. So yeah, this I'm busy working on right now. So of course, let me do this again. Just Byzantine finest. He says, "I love how the info Lloyd gives. You can always fact check and do our own research." Yeah, and I hope you do. I hope you do. I mean, you could always question my conclusion, my interpretation, but I don't think I make necessarily invalid interpretations. And especially given the volume of corroborating data, I think I draw what might be reasonable conclusions based on the data. So yeah, this one I think many of you have seen, right? It says here, this is in a book. I'll get to the paper. I've got the paper somewhere. I think it's Martin Luther's Body. And it says here about, let me just go back here. Yeah, this says here in some of, let me do this. Okay, here we are. This is Martin Luther, right? In some of his very last letters to his wife, he described his inability to be sexually aroused by the sight of prostitutes and blamed Jews for his illness. So, hey, honey, I know we don't do letters anymore. We do text messages. I just want to let you know, I'm not being sexually aroused by these prostitutes. I think it's the Jews. Yeah, I think it's the Jews. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. See you, honey. Bye. So yeah, Muhammad also couldn't. Muhammad also had a certain problem, and as we know, he thought he was sleeping with his wives, and he wasn't, and the Jews had bewitched him, so he blamed it on the Jews. Yes, Artifati, he was virile. There you go. This was a man whose body was fundamental to his personality. The material and the cultural should therefore be considered in tandem in regard to Luther. So yeah, because his big earthy body conveyed perfectly the physicality that was central to his character and the symbolic world of early Lutheranism. So he was a glutton, but also this is someone who is worldly. This is not holy. And thank you very much again. Hold on, let me just do this. Luther and Muhammad, no wonder the world was and is going to hell. We have such role models. Yes, thank you very much. I really am grateful. Thank you for the donation. But yes, yeah, there's one has to start asking questions here sometimes. Let me see. Yeah, so there's more to the faith alone story than just this. Okay, but according to Martin Luther, let me just read this. Our nature is so totally vitiated and depraved on account of this very corruption, considered as convicted and justified, condemned in the sight of God. Okay? So this liableness to punishment arises, right, from the sin of Adam, which renders us obnoxious to the divine judgment. It is not to be understood as if we, though innocent, were undeservedly loaded with the guilt of his sin, but we are all subject to a curse. You are cursed, you see. Like the Gnostics would tell you, we derive from him not only the punishment, but also the pollution to which the punishment is justly due. This is simply a retelling of the Gnostic tale of the world being corrupt, and we are corrupt. And Martin Luther does state that we cannot do anything other than sin. We are wholly sinful. Nothing we do, nothing we want to do, nothing we think of doing is other than corruption and abomination to God. There's nothing holy about us, therefore, only in your mind. Now, remember, Martin Luther was a nominalist. Again, things I will discuss and go through in step by step in the future. Martin Luther was a nominalist, right? So, which obviously means that words like holy and holiness and grace and so on, universals, did not exist. They were simply random words that we applied to events that we saw. And there were no outside universals. There were no outside fundamentals. Everything is purely subjective. Everything is relative because you are having a subjective experience relative to someone else. And therefore, whatever you felt, right, was purely your own interpretation. And therefore, Scripture alone, because Martin Luther refused to accept that reason, because nominalists believe that reason cannot grasp the outside world. You cannot find anything that is true outside of what's inside your skin, right? Based on your own personal private perception. So therefore, he only accepted the Bible, Scripture alone, on nominalist reasons. Because reason, scholasticism, was false. It's illusion. It's a joke. So therefore, only what is said in the Bible to be, let's say Jesus had this experience, or Paul or Peter or whatever, or one of the apostles he liked, when they said something, that was them having an experience and writing about it. And therefore, as a nominalist, he said, well, only those things that people had subjectively experienced and written about, only those are things I am willing to accept as valid. And therefore, he said Scripture alone, because he rejected objective external reason based on evidence and natural theology. He did not believe you can know God from knowing the world through using reason and inquiry, this and logic. That's why he rejected those so vehemently. It's because he was a nominalist. The man was off his rocker. Yeah, Martin Luther was extremely gross. So that's like the men that watch too much porn today. They can't perform with their wife. That's what Luther basically had them on, in porn addiction. So yeah, he was ahead of his time. Doesn't Islam object to the original sin? So there isn't really original sin. Yes, that is true. Oh, so anyway, infants themselves, as they bring their condemnation to the world, are rendered obnoxious. Their own sinfulness. Though they have not yet produced the fruit of their iniquity, they have their seed of it within them. Their whole nature, as infants, is a seed of sin, and they therefore cannot but be odious and abominable to God. Now, this is the kind of thinking that comes, this is Calvin, but this is the kind of thinking that comes out of Luther. Calvin stood on Luther's shoulders, right? So, Martin Luther's seizure disorder. So, let me have a look here. Actually, let me just play this. Why not? Oh, I can't. I'm still busy working on this. Okay, let's go here. Martin Luther's diseases are well documented because he used to discuss them freely in his letters. There's a wealth of evidence through reports by his friends. Okay, so he was coronary thrombosis, natural diseases. Luther also suffered from recurring attacks of a particular symptomatology. Luther and his friends considered these seizures to be no natural disease, but Satan punching his flesh. He was tormented by Satan. He compared them to St. Paul's disease, right? It began with a roaring tinnitus in his left ear, which increased dramatically and seemed to occupy the left half of his head. Then a state of sickness and collapse followed. Right? However, consciousness was retained. After a night's rest, all the symptoms had subsided except tinnitus. Similar attacks with the increase of the tinnitus and vertigo as the leading symptoms seized Luther at regular intervals. Investigators of Luther's diseases interpreted these attacks as manifestations of a psychiatric disorder and a chronic inflammatory disease of the middle ear. So yeah, Martin Luther, the healthy, virile male. Yeah. So this is PubMed. Martin Luther achieved great success in religious reformation, though he was said to have suffered from many kinds of disease in his lifetime. However, his medical history has never been reported in Japan. So since the second half of his 30s, he was suffering from severe constipation, causing hemorrhoids Martin Luther suffered from anal prolapse. At the beginning of his 40s, he had vertigo, tinnitus, and headaches. Now, let's get back to anal prolapse. Anal prolapse is, okay, gay people get it when they have gay sex, and the anus no longer stays closed. I believe it no longer has any tension, and it opens up, and then your rectum just pops out the feces. It just kind of runs out because it won't close. So because there's a leak, it's like having a leak in your bowels. Okay, let's put it that way. So according to PubMed, according to this, so here's a question: how did he get anal prolapse? Honestly, I mean, please drop me the answers. Look, we're adults here. This is not a pleasant subject. I'm well aware of that. I'm being blunt. Okay. How did he get anal prolapse? I mean, look, obviously you could say, well, Martin Luther had very, very bad constipation. And, it was just unfortunate, just very unfortunate. Or how else can one get anal prolapse? Maybe he slipped on the stairs, fell on his head, and it caused an anal prolapse. Maybe, yes, Lilo Main, maybe, who knows? Who knows? I mean, how do gay people get it? So look, I'm not saying the man's gay, but understand, it's like, okay, yeah, this is a thing that happens to gay people. Martin Luther had it too, but he got it from bananas and playing marbles. Yeah, and he suffered from verbal diarrhea. So yeah. So anyway, and then he had tinnitus, vertigo, and headaches, which were the signs of chronic purulent otitis media, and ended in left otorrhea and pyorrhea of the left mastoiditis. I am no doctor, but I have no clue what that just said. So he suffered from inguinal pain, colic, and dysuria due to urinary uric acid stones, gout, and left leg ulcer, which were all caused by metabolic syndromes. The last third of his life was affected by the shadow of diseases. Yeah, he died from myocardial infarction. And okay, great stuff. Let's see what else. According to this Protestant on this website that I was looking at, he had mental depression. He was a manic depressive. He's known to be a manic depressive. He would scream and shout like a madman, and he'd go into depression. Pain of gall and kidney stones, migraines, night wars. He would sit on the toilet and have screaming matches with Satan. He had anxiety and insomnia, ringing in his ears, dizziness, open ulcer on leg, constipation, diarrhea, and hemorrhoids. Yeah, sounds a little bit like Karl Marx and also Charles Darwin. So yeah, I don't know. Look, I mean, maybe I just made this up. Okay, maybe I went to the National Library of Medicine, and maybe I just made this up, and I'm just lying because I have nothing else to do on a Thursday night. Please, you tell me. Okay, maybe I just made this up myself. You never know. Was he vegetarian? No. They do claim he was a vegetarian, but it seems not. I mean, he says things. The problem is Martin Luther will say something on Wednesday that he contradicts on Thursday. So it's kind of like but it seems not. But it does seem he leaned towards vegetarianism, or he did eat a lot of veggies. You could infer that. But he was a very sick man, both mentally, and I think his spiritual illness was manifested in a very sick body. Yeah. So let me see here. Okay, what did I miss? Lloyd, if I'm being honest, these people that made evolution theory and said the fittest will survive themselves weren't fit at all. No, they were not. They were definitely not. Okay, so guys, have I missed anything? And yeah, what do you make of all this? I mean, what do you make of this? Melanchthon, I've already covered that. Yeah, he had often wondered, okay, to his father Hans, whether he was the only man whom the devil thus attacked and persecuted. Still working on that. Of course, Luther suggested to suffocate a 12-year-old boy who was disabled, right? Of course, the Nazis pounced on that. And then Luther is talking about, so this is Churches, Chaplains, and the Great War. Let's have a look. This book is called Churches, Chaplains, and the Great War, or article. You can easily find this online. The idea that war was an act of love is even more prominent among the German Protestants. It was Martin Luther who served as an essential inspiration to understand war as such. So look, we're going to love you to death, okay? My name is Martin, and these guys are going to kill you because war's an act of love. We're just cleaning up the world, and you're the dirt that we're cleaning up. So thanks. Just do me a favor. Just kind of let us kill you. So Luther explained the loving aspect of war with the example of a physician. And one should realize that by taking, the physician saves much more. So by killing all of these people we don't like, because Protestantism under Martin Luther was the religion of peace, He was just killing the bad people to bring peace as an act of love to save the others. The hand that wages such a sword and kills is not a human hand anymore, but God's hand. And not man, but God, who hangs, breaks on the wheel, decapitates. Nothing Muslim about that. Strangles and fights. These are all his works and his judgments. So war was God's work in progress. Thanks, Luther. Winning. War was a duty of love, a small inconvenience that would prevent a much more destructive evil. This obliged Christians to take the sword as God commanded. Sorry, did I say God? I meant Allah. Hold on. The hand that wages such a sword and kills is not a human hand, but Allah's hand. And not man, but Allah, who hangs, breaks on the wheel. This obliged Christians to take the sword as Allah commanded. So yeah, guys, I don't know. I didn't write this, but I'm probably lying now at this point. So yeah. Okay, so this last one I'll finish here. My throat is killing me. So we need to talk about polygamy at some point. I have a video on this on my channel, on Martin Luther and polygamy. In a letter to Chancellor Gregor Bruck, January 13th, 1524, Luther said, "I confess that I cannot forbid a person to marry several wives, for it does not contradict Scripture." So, as you know, as someone mentioned last week, the Bible also does not forbid cocaine. So, your priest, if your priest says, look, I cannot forbid you from taking cocaine, he's right. That's morally correct. That is perfectly Christian because the Bible doesn't forbid cocaine. If a man wishes to marry more than one wife, he should be asked whether he is satisfied in his conscience that he may do so, in accordance with the word of God. In such a case, the civil authority has nothing to do in this matter. Okay, so yeah, I'll be getting to this, but okay, so we'll talk about that. This is a bit of a complex one. So this remark, now I can't find this in the Estate of Marriage. This is a common quote, but the closest remark appears in a partially translated letter Luther wrote to Chancellor Bruck about the case of Philip of Hesse, who took a second wife. Now I'm still sorting this out. I'm still working this through. Luther discussed the possibility of allowing bigamy, drawing a comparison with figures from the Old Testament who had multiple wives. The principle was that if the action was not forbidden by Scripture, it was permissible. So yeah, guys, that's it from me. Thank you very much. I should call it a night. So yes, hopefully you guys have learned something. Thank you, Lolo Main. No, I'll stop here. That's great. Thank you very much, Lolo Main. Drive safely. And yeah. Got a demon in his butt? Okay, good grief. So guys, this is it. This I think his propagandists over the past 5 have done a great disservice to those of us who are not blessed with good discernment. Yeah. So guys, thank you. That's it. I hope this has been enlightening. Might have been a little bit offensive. Yeah, it's just the nature of the topic, and we'll cover something else next time. So thank you very much for all the support, and do talk about this. I mean, I don't think I'm exaggerating. I don't think I'm cherry picking or taking one example. I'm using hundreds of examples like this, and I'll be doing this for a couple of months. So you'll see this is not a one-off. So thanks, guys. Good night. God